Tomorrow night is tonight is Yud Aleph. Tomorrow night is Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz is a yontif in Chabad because it's the days of the liberation of the Frierdiker Rebbe from prison, and it was under miraculous circumstances, and the previous Rebbe declared that it should be a yontif. And so I thought we would learn something about Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. There's a famous sikha in which is in Yud Ches of the Likutei Sikhas, for those who want to look it up. And the sikha deals with a few issues which center around miracles. So before we start the sikha, I thought we'd just do a bit of an analysis of miracles, because it's a word that everybody uses, but I'm not sure how educated most people are in what this is. So let's start with this. If I said to you, does God change his mind? I mean, that's a laughable concept, surely. If Hashem is infinite, infinitely wise, how is he going to ever have to change his mind? And if he's not going to ever have to change his mind, if you think about it, what's a miracle? A miracle is a reversal of something in nature. So if Hashem created Gashmias, which we know he did, and he's recreating Gashmias every moment, which we know he is, Robert, can I trouble you to close the door? Stop your cough.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think everyone's here by now. Thanks very much.
Sure.
So, if Hashem is creating the world every moment and concentrating in inverted commas, on every blade of grass, on every hair on your head, on the digestive system in your gut, the saliva that you're making under your tongue, all of these things are being created every moment deliberately by Hashem, meaning that he has control of all of that every moment. Where is there room in ordinary logic to say that he's going to reverse what he's doing? For example, Kriyas Yamsuf. Hashem makes water, and he makes water flow from a high point to a low point, as everybody knows. How is it that he's going to say, well, all of a sudden that's not going to do, and to impress everybody, I will hold the water back on either side? How is that possible? What logic drives the assumption that Hashem is going to interfere with his creation? And you can ask a deeper and harder question. You can say, well, what possible condition can exist that necessitates Hashem interfering with his creation, being that since Hashem has created it, it must be perfect. So if it must be perfect for water to flow from above to below. Why is it, under what conditions is Hashem going to need, in inverted commas, to take his creation and uproot it and overturn it? Is that a fair question? I mean, so you should know that amongst tzaddikim generally, and Chabad in particular, until our Rebbe conversations about miracles were very sparse and not encouraged. For example, there's a well-known printed situation where a woman went to the Tzemach Tzedek. She was an almona, that she was a widow. I'm sorry, she wasn't a widow. That was the whole point. Her husband left her without a get. So she had no get, didn't know where the husband was, couldn't get remarried, obviously, because in Jewish law a woman needs a get to get remarried. And it's a very cruel thing to do. The husband hated her so much that he ran off and left her without a get. And in desperation, she went to the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek told her to go to such and such a place, far away in the other side of Russia or Poland or wherever. It was a long way away, and to look in such and such a market, which she did, and found him and got a whole lot of guys and it had a happy ending. I won't waste time with the story, but the fact is that she expressed her gratitude to the Rebbe for the miracle of him being able to see and he explained that it wasn't a miracle. He went to great pains to explain that it wasn't a miracle, that he knew about it because of this, and he worked out because of that, and he was a barber or he was a this, I can't remember what it was, so he had to have somewhere where they had those things in that marketplace, and he went through all the logical steps to how it was that he did it. So much so that when the Rebbe, our Rebbe, came to America, the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in 1940. The Rebbe came in the late 40s, 48 I think, 47, 48. No, earlier, 42 I think he came. And there is an exchange of letters between him and the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Rebbe, very respectfully of course, almost challenges the Frierdiker Rebbe on why the miracles that the Rebbeim do aren't for public consumption. Why aren't they disclosed? And the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains there that it's not the meaning about it, and it's not their way. And the Rebbe very politely insists and says, it's a function of our times. We're shoveling the ashes of Am Yisrael out of the ovens of Europe, and they're downtrodden, they're beaten, their spirits are low, and miracles do appeal to everybody's imagination. So in so far as they do exist, why hide them? And that became the Rebbe's position throughout his Nasias, and our generation with our Rebbe is to be very used to miracles and to be and to take them basically for granted. So what is it that the previous Rebbeim were so reluctant to publicize, and what is it that once the Rebbe did publicize it, it's clear that it should be part of our learning to understand what the miracles are. So what inhibited the publication of it was what I was saying. You need somebody who is learned and has strong betochen, not to be fooled by this question of does God change his mind. We haven't got time for this, otherwise we won't get to the shir. I'll just give you the basic underlying principles so you can think it through yourselves. Everybody in this year is capable of that, and people who listen to the tape regularly, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, we learn about Dira B'Tachtoin in making a dwelling place for Hashem in the lowest possible world. That's done by humanity in general and Am Yisrael in particular. So there is a dialogue between Hashem and humanity, and that dialogue is one which, I'm not talking about a speech dialogue, I'm talking about a relationship dialogue and we've talked about this many times in this year, that depending on how a Jew lives, he is the architect of his destiny. And Am Yisrael in general is the architect of Am Yisrael's destiny. And humanity is the architect of its destiny. So there is a relationship. Now, sometimes when Am Yisrael in general or particular individuals behave with outstanding whatever it is, and we'll examine what it is in a minute, Hashem changes nature, not because he's changed his mind, but because the circumstances are changed given that perspective. Let me give you an example. Avram Avinu, he had 10 tests, as everybody knows. One of his tests was what's called the Kivshana Eish. It was there was a villain called Nimrod, and Nimrod wanted him to bow to an idol. He refused. Nimrod said, if you refuse, I'm going to throw you into this cauldron of fire. Avram Avinu said, what do I care? Throw me into the cauldron of fire. He throws him in, and he walks out unharmed. Now, Avram Avinu had a brother, and the brother was a holy man. He lived with his brother. He learned Torah with his brother. And when he was offered the choice of being thrown into the fire or bowing to the idol, he saw that Avram was in front of him, so he thought, I really would rather not bow to the idol. I'll really try, but I'll see what happens to Avram. So Avram gets thrown into the fire and walks out, so he says, I'm good, throw me into the fire. Gets thrown into the fire and he burns up. What's the difference? The difference is one of degree. The difference is one of degree of not betoken, what we're going to learn about in this sikha is Mesiras Nefesh. That's the difference. We'll come to that, and I'll try and define Mesiras Nefesh. For the moment, let's talk about it as self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is not a good translation of it. Let me explain why. Because that would also explain martyrdom, right? And you can have martyrs who are prepared to self-sacrifice themselves, and they can be very evil people. We know that in our generation, there are people, suicide bombers in the Middle East who've caused terrible pain and trouble to so many people. And they do it with total self-sacrifice. They're prepared to martyr themselves. Their parents are prepared to martyr their children. Less evil, we had the experience in the Second World War. I didn't, but we read about the kamikaze pilots whose job it was to fly the planes into Pearl Harbor and hit the ships, and they knew that they were going to die. So what's the difference between Mesiras Nefesh for Kedusha, like Avram Avinu, and a kamikaze pilot or a suicide bomber? The difference is this, that the suicide bomber has his own agenda. It's an agenda to complete him in some way, to complete his ego, to complete his sense of purpose, whatever it is, it's about him. And it's about him doing what he perceives as the greater good. But it's a personal investment. Real Mesiris Nefesh for a Jew has nothing to do with the Jew. It's just a function of his relationship with his God, which can't tolerate anything to the contrary. A simple example would be if you had a father or a mother that you loved very dearly, who'd been wonderful to you all your life, and it would be inconceivable to you to do her or him any harm. It's just inconceivable. It's not that you would, it's not that you have an agenda, you just are so involved with that person that self-sacrifice, it's not a sacrifice of self because there's no self in it. The relationship is such that there's no self in it at all. So when Avram Avinu is told about the idol, it's so repugnant to him at every level in his relationship with his God that he's just not going to bow to the idol. And therefore, he's thrown into the pit. And it so happens, we learn, that justifies a change in physicality. That dialogue between him and his God is sufficient to change that level of physicality. Now, is it a subtle difference? So subtle that his own brother got burned. And you know, when it says, when we have a piece of Gemara which says that a Jew is not entitled to rely on miracles, right? You know that? There's a Gemara, not allowed to rely on miracles, but we all do. So how do you explain the paradox? You're not entitled to rely on miracles because your Mesiris Nefesh isn't strong enough, probably, for most people. But if it is, then of course you are. Because if you're doing Ratzon Hashem, absolutely doing Ratzon Hashem, if you're totally 100% doing Ratzon Hashem, what harm can come to you? How can you be harmed by that? So, with miracles, that they need to be divided into two, and then I'll explain a different division into two. The division into two is this, that miracles can be done for Am Yisrael as a nation or as a group, and it can be done for individuals. When you analyze, bless you, when you analyze miracles looking backwards in history, it's always a function of this concept of Mesiris Nefesh, of being ready to sacrifice everything for the relationship that you have, because anything else is unthinkable. Robert, do you want some water?
I've been drinking.
Now, the second division that you need to understand is that there are two levels of miracles. One level is Nisim, miracles which are what's called mislabished in Teva. And there's those that break Teva. So, nature. So, let me give you an example. A miracle that breaks nature is Kriyas Yam Suf, splitting of the sea. It is not natural for the sea to stand up like a wall on either side. That's when Hashem demonstrates his dominion over nature, and that is a lower level of miracle. A higher level of miracle is where Hashem uses the nature itself to create a miraculous event which is still apparent, which still can be understood it to be a miracle, but doesn't look like one. For example, the whole Purim story. You read the whole Purim story from beginning to end, and at no point does anything happen which is like Kriyas Yamsuf. No genie jumps out of a bottle. No man is turned to stone. Everything happens naturally. Sure, many things are wondrous that she goes into the king and has been fasting for 3 days, Esther, and she goes in uninvited, and not only is she not beheaded, which was the usual protocol under those circumstances, but she's rewarded with getting what she wants, which is the reversal of the plans of Haman. But there's nothing about any of those events that you look at and you say, oh, the splitting of the sea, or the sun stops going from east to west and rises from in the opposite direction. So and we learn that those miracles, which are mislabished in Teva, which are enclosed in nature, are higher than those where nature is broken, because it's a higher octave. Now, that's all background. Let's go to Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, and the Frierdiker Rebbe. So let me tell you the story very quickly. The Frierdiker Rebbe was teaching Torah in general and to children in particular. We'll come to that. Check on the time, Yoy. And was punished for that, and his punishment was the death penalty, which was then made into Golus, exile, and then that was commuted again to from years to 3 weeks, and then finally he was released, and released by the very people that imprisoned him. So, and during that 3 weeks, he's written a book which is translated into English, and if you get a chance, you should read it, because it's an extraordinary book. I mean, the picture that we've all seen 100 times of Trump with his ear bleeding and the American flag, and he's waving his fist, it ain't nothing compared to what the Frierdiker Rebbe, what his position was in those 3 weeks. He refused to give his captives any credibility whatsoever. They told him to stand, he ignored them. They told him to do this, he ignored them. They threatened him and beat him, and he suffered terribly in the prison. We have a record of all of that, and he was totally unmoved by it, because of this level of Mesiras Nefesh that he had for Yiddishkeit. And this level of Mesiras Nefesh that he had for Yiddishkeit, I'm going to invite you to see, was the very force that reversed his imprisonment and the death sentence and everything else that he was doing. Now, why? Just before we start that, to keep the story clear for everybody, there are two things that you need to know. One is that teaching Torah and Yiddishkeit was not forbidden legally in Russia at the time. And therefore, one of the things that the Rebbe was entitled to claim was that he wasn't doing anything illegal. Notwithstanding that, he was hunted down and pursued and libeled, unfortunately by Jews as well, and that caused but the thing that really caused the prison sentence was that he was teaching children, and although he was doing everything else surreptitiously, he was appointing rabbonim and sending rabbis to various places to do brisim and to run kashrus and underground yeshivas and mikvois and all of those things that he was doing, which were not theoretically illegal, but hated by the new government, by the new philosophy. But the sin that he was committing was listening to the Gemara that says that if you have no kids, if you have no kids, there will be no goats. So he was teaching children Yiddishkeit. That's what was forbidden. So he was arrested and incarcerated and tortured terribly. Now, just to understand the perspective together, you've got one man, a Jew, with no army, with no ammunition, with no armaments, and the whole of mighty Russia. You should know that Russia had the majority of Jews on the planet alive there. In fact, there's a very, very interesting Farbrengen where the Rebbe says, almost as a side thing, an incredible statement. He says that Russia was the most powerful nation on earth. How do we know? Because it had the greatest Jewish population. And whichever country is the host country from Israel, they are the country that they are the most powerful countries in the world. And historically that's been true. And people make the mistake, says the Rebbe in this Farbrengen, of thinking that Jews go to the place of success, but don't understand that it's their presence there that gives the host nation its success. And there was an amazing thing when the thing happened with, what was his name, the guy with the thing on his head, with the Gorbachev thing was on, and the Rebbe was telling people in Israel to prepare for Russian settlements. They thought he was crazy, you couldn't get out of Russia. I mean, I don't need to tell Russians what. And then when it became a reality that it was going to be not only a possibility, but somebody once said that there were only X million Jews in Russia, and the Rebbe, and there's no census, and the Rebbe corrected them in this Farbrengen and said, no, that there were 3 million Jews in Russia. How did he know? Because there were 3 million Jews in America. And since the two countries were the two world powers, they had to have the majority of Jews living there, otherwise they wouldn't be the world powers. And how did he know that the number there would be around 3 million? Because they were equally powerful. At that stage, this was after the Bay of Pigs in Cuba and in the 60s. So
I think there might be more than 3 million in America at that time.
Whatever it was, that was the same balance that was in America and was there. And it's very interesting. I mean, we haven't got time for this, but at the moment it's the first time in history since the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash that the population of Israel has the most Jews in it than any other country in the world. That's the first time since then. And you see how powerful Israel is. I mean, we've got this tiny little country with no population, fits into Tasmania in size, and the whole world talks about nothing else but Israel all day and all night. Anyway, I don't want to get to that. So back to, so the Mesiras Nefesh that the Frierdiker Rebbe had absolutely ignored every obstacle. And here you have this one man, one Jew, standing against the mightiest of, second mightiest or equal mightiest nation on earth, Russia, with all their resources against him. And look, today Stalin's dead and forgotten, and Chabad is thriving, and Am Yisrael Chai. So, is that miraculous? Certainly, it's miraculous. Is it an obvious miracle in the way of Kriyas Yam Suf? No, but it's a miracle. I'll give you another example of a miracle that's established in nature. I don't know that this is true, but I'm repeating to you what a very famous Lubavitcher Chassid said, and I was present when he said it. You know, when the Gulf War was on, and they sent the 39 Scud missiles, and the Rebbe told everybody that they didn't need to wear gas masks, and they shouldn't be frightened, and only one person perished with those whole 39 Scud missiles in Israel, and that was someone who died of fright, had a heart attack dying of fright, because Nebuchadnezzar probably didn't know what the Rebbe said. I'm assuming he wasn't disobedient. Can you be disobedient and govern fear? I'm not sure you can. So, but I was driving in Bondi Junction when they announced the Scud missiles, and the Goyish commentator who was saying the news over said, the world is witnessing a miracle. 39 Scud, nothing got detonated, no gas warheads, they all missed their targets, Within 24 hours, all the press was saying, oh yeah, there was no miracle. The Russians didn't know how to build them properly. The Arabs didn't know how to shoot them properly. They were kept in bunkers of sand. How can you keep missiles in sand bunkers? If you keep missiles in sand bunkers, obviously they're going to miss. And within 24 hours, everybody had a rational explanation for it. That's a miracle mislabished in Teva, in nature.
That happened a few months ago with the Iranian attack.
It's exactly the same thing, yeah. So, okay, so the Rebbe explains this, that if Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz falls out we have a Shalah, we have a commentator, famous Kabbalistic commentator called the Shalah, who teaches that everything that happens is connected with the weekly Sidra because of Ashkoka protests. So it means, and all our Yomim Tovim can be found in the week in which we learn, in the weeks that we learn that week's Torah. So the Rebbe says, obviously, if that's the case, if Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz falls out in Parshas, it's usually Parshas Hukas and BALAK. They're two Parshas that we joined together. Last week we did Hukas together. This week we would really be doing, on a normal year, BALAK would be together with last week's Sidra, because they're usually joined together. So the Rebbe in this Sikha says, well, obviously Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz can be found in the Sidra, and because it's normally a joint Sidra, there will be aspects of it in Parshas Hukas and aspects of it in Parshas BALAK. I'll just tell you briefly, because although that's the core of the Sikha, but I've spent so much time on miracles, so basically, as far as Hukas is concerned, I'll remind you from last week that Hukas starts off Zois Hukas HaTorah. There are three forms. There are three kinds of mitzvahs: mishpatim, Adis and Hukim. Hukim are those mitzvahs which make no sense, no logical sense at all. But even amongst those, for example, shatnez, we're not allowed to wear wool and linen together. Why not? What possible conceivable logical reason can there be for not wearing wool and linen together? Some hukim, the reason is kind of a bit flesh outable. For example, kashrus. We don't mix meat and milk. We can eat milk followed by meat, but we can't eat meat followed by milk. So that's a hoik, because it makes no sense. If Hashem can design your and my body with all the complexities and genius that it is, he can design a body that can digest meat and milk together. It's just nonsensical to presume that there's a difficulty in you and my digesting meat and milk together. But why is it? Well, we don't know. It's a hoik. But the Rebbeim have let out a hint that if you deal with somebody and you deal with them with gevura followed by chesed, that's no good. You have to deal with them with chesed, and then if it's necessary, you impose the gevura. So chesed corresponds to milk. It's nourishment. It's giving. And gevura to meat, to blood, to anger, to discipline. So if you're disciplining, if you want to bring up a child, for example, and you terrorize the child and then try and make up and kiss it and cuddle it, and they're too smart, they won't forgive you for that when time goes by and you repeat it often enough. On the other hand, if the child is satisfied that you're doing it for its own good because you've expressed love for the child and the child is confident of your love for it, and that chesed comes first, then you'll be able to effectively punish the child and make it work. So there are some hukim where there's a glimmer of reason, some where it's much harder to find that glimmer. But para duma, the red cow, has nothing. Even King Solomon said he doesn't understand it. He looked for it, he understood every other mitzvah, but no idea. And it's the maddest story that if you're spiritually impure, you have to have this mumbo jumbo, God forbid, of the water, which has the ashes of a red cow with no more than 2 black hairs, and when the Kohen gives it to you and you get purified, the Kohen gets Tomei. It just makes no sense at all. So the Rebbe explains that the connection of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz to Pashas Hukas and the hoik of the red cow in particular is that when the Frierdiker Rebbe stood up against communist Russia alone, it made no sense. Just no sense. He had no chance. Had no chance. It made no sense. He had, he had and you have to understand what personal pain he had. Not even for himself when he was being tortured in Kostroma. He says in his account of this in his book, he kept a diary when he was in the prison. He had a secret society of 10 men, a Hevra Kadisha as it was called, of 10 men who swore, they drew blood from their thumbs, and they swore that they would do whatever is necessary the Frierdiker Rebbe told them to do, even if it cost their lives, right? Now you should know that...
Is that allowed?
That's the question. Is it allowed to do that? We are only allowed to die, to give our lives for 3 averas. One is Gilei Arois, sexual immorality. One is for idol worship and one is for murder. And yet they did it. So we'll see why maybe in it. I'll try and get to that in a minute. But so these men were his good friends. You know, they were Chassidim, they were people that he loved very dearly. And many of them died. They were arrested, murdered, tortured. And the next day, the Rebbe replaced them with another shliach. Can you imagine what that felt like? These are his best friends. This is a man whose love for Ahavas Yisrael was unparalleled in his generation, and he's sending men to their death. So, and it made no sense because theoretically he couldn't win. How can he win? How can he win against Stalin and his whole machine, the whole machine? And yet he won. So two things took place. He had Mesiras Nefesh to the point that, and what Robert raised is very interesting because the Rebbe explains in this Sikha that although the Parah Aduma is called Zois Hukas HaTorah, this is the real Hoik of the Torah, this is the one mad one, so it's not called Hukas HaTorah when we talk in conversation, Jews, and it says Minig Yisrael Torahi. When Jews talk about Parshas Hukas, they just call it Parshas Hukas, not Hukas HaTorah. Why is it Parshas Hukas? Because it's so wild, so separate, so much of a hoik that it bears no relationship to anything intellectually concludable. It has nothing to do with intellect, nothing to do with seichel, nothing to do with Hakama. All it has to do with is the absolute one-eyed, one-souled connection with Ratzon Hashem. That there's nothing else that not only matters, exists. This level of Mesiras Nefesh is like this hoik, just as this hoik has no seichel and no hokmah, same thing with this level of Mesiras Nefesh. It has nothing to do with proving a point, it has nothing to do with being right, it has nothing to do with the kamikaze pilots going down in honor, in doing something that they believe in for the good welfare of the country or the state or whatever it is. It is because any other choice is impossible. Just absolutely impossible. And somehow or other, when the perspective is as sharp as that and clear as that, Hashem provides the exit. Whether it's for Avraham Avinu or the Friedrich Rebbe. You know, after the Rebbe had his heart attack in 1972 or 3, I can't remember now, 72 I think. Someone will correct me with an email tomorrow. But he had it on Simchas Torah, and it was in Hakofis, and he was, instead of being taken to hospital, the hospital came to him, and his room was set up as a hospital. They flew in Dr. Weiss from Canada, who's a big heart specialist, and after Motzi Yontov, the Rebbe used to give out Koishel Brocha. Koishel, people would stand in a line. I have a picture of me holding my now 45-year-old son. He was a little kid this big, and we're standing in this queue. Motzi Yontov, at the end of Yontov, 4 hours, 5 hours, 5,000 people, 6,000 people. And the Rebbe's pouring from his cup to that, and another guy's filling up his glass all the time. And the Rebbe came out after this heart attack for Koishel Brocha, and no one wanted to line up. Who would want to line up and put the Rebbe to that pain and effort after he's had a heart attack, and they brought a whole hospital to him, and the doctor's saying, "Please, I'm begging you, don't do it." And he's saying it aloud in front of people in 770, in the Zal. And then we have a famous thing where the Dr. Weiss turns to the Rebbe and says, "Rebbe, I'm telling you, if you do this, you have a 75% chance of a relapse." Right? Or it might have been a 25% chance of relapse. Let's say it was a 25% chance. And the Rebbe ignores him, and he says, "Rebbe, did you hear what I said? Please, I'm the doctor here. Did you hear what I said?" And the Rebbe turned to him and he said, "Yes, you told me that I have a 75% chance that everything will be all right." So, why? And then he said to the Hasidim, he said, "You're all being tippish, stupid, right? Why? Because why do I have koyach? Why does Hashem give me koyach as Rebbe? He gives me koyach because you need me. You need my brachas. You don't line up. You don't need me. Hashem, I don't need to have a koyach. If you really care for me, line up." And people did. And he did Koshel Bracha. Now, if he had any doubt about that, I don't know. I only give the shia. But the way we learn, it's implicit in the way we learn that if the Rebbe had any doubt about his Mesiras Nefesh for Am Yisrael, needing those brachas and Koshel Bracha, then he wouldn't have had the miracle of being able to do. What person can have a heart attack like that and stand there for 3 hours and do Koshel Bracha? Now the Frierdiker Rebbe had three tukufos, three periods in his Nesias, in his being Rebbe, each for 10 years. He became Rebbe in 1920. From 1920 to 1930 he was in Russia and suffered terribly because of the institutionalized persecution of what he was doing. After he was released from prison, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the next 10 years he spent in Poland and other places, but mainly in Poland, where in his diary he said he suffered more. Why? Because bear in mind this is before the war, and there were plenty of religious Jews in Poland, and plenty who thought they knew what they were talking about, and plenty who questioned what the Rebbe stood for and was doing, in exactly the same way as you were prompted by that question, which is a good question. Imagine how if somebody who really knows halakha is disturbed by this, how can a Rebbe do what the Rebbe was doing? Right? So he was criticized very much by Gedolei Yisrael, by great Rebbes in Poland. And he suffered terribly with that, but he didn't budge a hairbreadth. And then the third 10 years was that we came to the United States in 1940, and the first thing that happened when he was greeted by the power brokers when he got to America was, "Rebbe, you gotta understand, here nobody wears a beard, and there's not much anti-Semitism. We don't want to start up. We don't want another Europe. Everybody's happy here. Everybody plays in the same sandpit. Just back down, Chill." And the Rebbe said, "America loy underish. It's not different." And he started building from the first day. And the miracle is that, Rabbi Feldman used to tell me that when he was a boy in 770, they used to have the Farbrengen on Shabbos Mevorachim, and he told me that there were less people in the Fabringen Shabbos Mevorachim than there were in Fabringen in Yeshiva in the old days. There were 20 guys there. That was Chabad. 20 guys. We don't even know what they're talking about. There are 3,000 Chabad houses in the world at the moment, or more. So in each of those three periods, the Mesiras Nefesh that the Frierdiker Rebbe had was totally unwavering, totally without any kind of limitation at all. So now what about BALAK? That's also part of this. You should know the Rebbe gets to Parshas BALAK in about halfway through the Sikha, so I'm sorry we're not going to be able to do it in its proper detail, but basically the story with BALAK and Bilam, everybody knows. BALAK was a king, he hated Am Yisrael, totally unreasonably, as always anti-Semitism has been. It was additionally unreasonable because they had nothing to fear from Am Yisrael. Hashem had told Am Yisrael that they weren't allowed to fight with these people, they weren't allowed to take any of the land, they weren't allowed to do anything to cause them any grief, and therefore there was no reason for him to be concerned about Am Yisrael, and yet he hated them so much that he wanted to find a way to curse them. The only way he could do that is he worked out very cleverly that Am Yisrael lived with their brains and the way their Chokhmah and Bina were expressed through the Levushim of Machshava, Dibur, and Meiser, of thought, speech, and action. So how do you deal with them? You deal with them through speech. So he finds a prophet, Bilam, and Bilam is given the job of cursing them. Bilam explains to them, you can't curse Am Yisrael. Why can't you curse Am Yisrael? Because Am Yisrael have their own pain in their relationship with their God, but you can't eradicate them. Am Yisrael Chai. There's no such thing. Hashem gave a promise to Avram Avinu between the thing that and Am Yisrael will always exist. We'll always have anti-Semitism. That's a whole other shir. That's a whole other spiritual reason, which has to do with the other side of Matan Torah and being given a specific shlichus in our lives. But there's no way that Am Yisrael has ever been or ever will be eradicated. So Bilam explains that to BALAK, and BALAK says, you're not trying hard enough. So the result is that there is no curse, and on the contrary, the very material of those curses becomes Am Yisrael's brachas. In the same way as the very people who took the Frierdiker Rebbe into jail were the very people who were forced to be the ones to let him out. And at the end of the day, the whole issue with BALAK and Bilam reflects the fact that let me just say this to you. So we have an incredible piece in this week's Sedra about the donkey that talks, right? So we have this whole thing with the donkey that talks. I won't go into it, we haven't got time. But sof kol sof, at the end of the day, you have a truth, which we believe in absolutely, that the donkey talked. Right? Now, if the donkey talked without vocal cords, without a cerebral cortex, you have to say that's a miracle, right? So, amongst those people that said, well, if Hashem can make a donkey, the donkey's going to be perfect. If the donkey's perfect, it's perfect as a donkey that doesn't talk. How would God reverse his creation and make it talk? So the people who don't learn Chassidus, the ordinary nigla, say that when the donkey was created, in Sheshis Yimei Bereshis, that donkey, the potential for that donkey to talk was created at that time, right? So there wasn't a change of mind or a change of anything, but that's what happened. Now, although that may be true, that is not the thrust of what we've been learning. The thrust of what we've been learning is that miracles, number one, do exist. Number two, are at two different levels, one that is mislavished enclosed in nature, and one which is breaks nature, which is a lower level of miracle. Accessing those miracles is an availability for every Jew, but it becomes a function of how genuine, maybe next door, must be a function of how genuine your Mesiris Nefesh for Ratzon Hashem is. That's the formula. Mesiris Nefesh for Ratzon Hashem. And we all have it to some extent. All of us. Everybody has their own private dialogue with their God. Everybody has their own interaction with their God. And then you go through levels of betochen, of trust in your God. And if that level of trust is high enough and deep enough and focused enough, then the Mesiris Nefesh becomes a reality. And the more of a reality there is, the more you can rely, without relying on it, without thinking, well, I'm doing this for the miracle, but the more you can not be surprised if the miracle takes place. And that's our story in our history, the history of Am Yisrael. Sure, there have been people that have left the Seder table, as I told you that wonderful thing that the Rebbe says that we break the Afikoyman in two, and the major part you hide away, and the minor part stays at the Seder table. But you can't finish the Seder without the Afikoyman. You have to go out and get those other Jews and bring them to the table. And why? Because essentially we all belong there. And essentially that is our perspective. And our perspective is a relationship with our God, our parent, our Father, our God, our tutor, our teacher, and the more one is conscious of that focus, the more likely that one will have the level of Mesiris Nefesh that's necessary for a miracle. And it's not a dirty word, a miracle. That's what the Rebbe wanted to convince his father-in-law of. His father-in-law was just worried in whose hands it would be. The Rebbe was confident that in our hands it's all right. That's why we have them. So l'chaim, we should all merit them.